Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I came to the woods for silence. What I found was a war. Armed with laws, lies, and a clipboard, one HOA queen tried to steal my land, frame me for crimes, and rewrite the map. But I've hunted predators before, and this time, the most dangerous one walked on two legs. I didn't come to the woods to find peace. I came here because I was tired of having to justify the right to it. After 15 years working for Oregon's Fish and Wildlife Division, most of them spent tracking poachers through terrain that chewed up boots and spit out bones. I thought I'd seen every kind of entitled behavior nature could spit back. Turns out I hadn't met a homeowners association yet. My name's Tyler Briggs. I'm 38, recently retired, not by age but by necessity. Burnout, bureaucratic nonsense, and one too many suits trying to tell me I was too aggressive in enforcing wildlife policy sent me packing with a solid pension and zero regrets. I took that as a sign to finally do what I'd been daydreaming about for years. Buy a patch of land big enough that nobody could stand too close to me without hiking boots and a topo map. That patch became 74 acres of raw, untouched forest, wrapped around the north end of Lake Gravewood in Washington state. No neighbors for miles on my side. I didn't just buy it, I made it a legally designated private nature reserve, fenced with steel-posted GPS-marked boundaries, signage every 100 feet, wildlife cameras, registered access trails, controlled hunting, and catch-and-release fishing only, by permit. I did it by the book, down to the last signature. Not just because I'm a stickler, but because I knew the only thing more dangerous than a drunk trespasser with a rifle was a bored local politician with a clipboard. And for the first year, it worked. I built a small but solid log cabin near the lake's edge, started restoring a few abandoned trapper shacks into guest cabins, and opened the place up to a tight list of vetted clients, retired military, nature photographers, the occasional executive, with something to atone for. People who respected land, rules, and silence. The way I saw it, if you stepped into my woods, it meant you stepped out of the noise. Then came Lakefront Meridian. You wouldn't know it from the North Shore, but on the southern rim of Gravewood, someone had decided to wedge luxury where it didn't belong. Lakefront Meridian was a development of 26 homes, each trying to outdo the next with stone driveways, gas-powered tiki torches, and signs boasting private beach access, as if the lake gave a damn about fences. At the head of this bourgeois parade marched a woman named Karen Stillman, president of their HOA, part-time fitness instructor, and full-time pain in the ass. Karen and I didn't meet formally for a while. I mostly saw her through binoculars, storming down the community dock in yoga pants, barking orders at teens with paddleboards, posing for newsletters next to scenic preservation signs she had no legal right to install. I figured as long as she kept to her side of the lake, she could LARP as park ranger all she wanted. But you can smell a control freak before you hear them. The first sign of trouble came through a local newsletter one of my guests showed me. A glossy self-congratulatory rag called The Meridian Echo. Page 3 featured an op-ed titled Reclaiming Our Shared Shoreline, written by none other than Karen Stillman herself. She talked about unregulated hunting sounds from the other side of the lake, warned about unaccountable landowners bringing weapons into family-friendly zones, and ended with a call for community-based shoreline oversight. She never named me, but I was the only one dumb enough to actually follow game management law. Then came the first unofficial complaint. One of my renters, a widower from Spokane, was fly fishing near the dock when Karen approached, clipboard in hand. She told him he was on community waters and that HOA bylaws required a boat permit. He politely told her to shove her bylaws back where they came from and came back rattled. I sent her a formal cease and desist letter. She sent back a photo of my property with red marker circles and the words, pending review. I laughed. Until I didn't. A week later, I caught one of her HOA board members sneaking along my northern fence line with a drone. The footage showed him getting tangled in blackberry vines and panicking like he was in a Blair Witch remake. I posted it to my client newsletter with the caption, When HOA Meets GPS Coordinates. People loved it. Karen didn't. Then came the community safety meeting at Lakefront Meridian's rec center, which a friend of mine in real estate snuck into. Karen reportedly called my land a rogue operation and described me as a man who believes a state license gives him permission to put bullets near families. A local deputy, clearly someone on HOA's Christmas card list, nodded along. I figured maybe I could ride it out. Stay quiet, let her bark, let the laws speak for themselves. But the thing about people like Karen, when they don't get their way on paper, they start testing the lines on foot. And one chilly morning in late October, just after first light, I heard the first shot fired. Not from me, from her. It wasn't a bullet, of course. It was a voice, high-pitched and righteous, cutting through the stillness like a chainsaw through fog. "You! I'm calling the police. Illegal hunting. This is a violation of environmental code." She was on my land. And she had a radio, and a flashlight, and, God help me, a reflective vest that said HO Observer. That was the day it all started. I had just finished gutting the morning's first coyote when her voice cracked the silence like a siren fired into a cathedral. The sun had barely peeled itself over the ridge, mist still hanging low above the lake, when Karen Stillman burst out of the tree line wearing what looked like a bargain bin park ranger costume, reflective vest, baseball cap, radio clipped to her shoulder, and a flashlight, even though dawn had already landed. She froze when she saw my rifle, then pointed her flashlight at me like she was conducting a felony traffic stop. "Drop the weapon. This is illegal. I'm reporting you for unauthorized hunting against community policy." Community policy. On my 74 acres of legally documented private land. I lowered the rifle barrel toward the ground and raised an eyebrow. "Morning, Karen. You're trespassing." "I am conducting a shoreline safety inspection," she snapped, already pulling out her phone. "And I'm calling 911 because you are discharging firearms within range of residential families." Her thumb hit the call button before I could respond. She strutted in a tight circle, flashlight jerking dramatically, like she imagined helicopters would swoop down any second to reward her heroism. 911. "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher answered, and Karen's voice immediately went breathy, trembling, Oscar-worthy. "This is Officer Stillman," she declared, which was lie number one. "I am on the north perimeter of Lakefront Meridian performing morning patrol, and I have a male with a loaded rifle. He pointed it at me. I repeat, he pointed it directly at me, and he's engaged in illegal poaching." I almost dropped the coyote out of sheer disbelief. "Officer Stillman," I muttered. Jesus Christ. My guest for the morning, an older man named Jeff who had a controlled predator permit, stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Ma'am," he said gently, "this hunt is licensed." "He showed you the sign." "Stay back," she shrieked at him. "I will not be threatened." Jeff blinked. "By who? Gravity?" I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out my laminated wildlife permits, my land deed copy, and the predator management approval sheet. I held them up. "These are legal documents. You're not allowed here." Karen refused to look at them. She angled her camera at me instead. "This man is attempting to mislead law enforcement. I need immediate response units. He's getting aggressive." I hadn't moved an inch. Jeff muttered under his breath, "You sure we can't tranquilize her?" I shot him a warning look, though I couldn't deny the temptation. Within minutes, the distant thrum of an engine began echoing between the trees. Not good. If it were one cruiser, it might have been fine, but I heard two. Then three. Karen straightened like a soldier awaiting reinforcements. "Backup is arriving," she whispered like it was a sacred prophecy. 3 patrol vehicles swung onto my main trail, gravel spitting beneath their tires. 2 officers emerged with neutral expressions. The third, Officer Matthew Crane, stepped out last, and the way he looked at Karen told me everything. They knew each other. Well, Crane approached her first. She dramatically pointed at me as if accusing me of arson, murder, and tax evasion all at once. "That's him, Officer Crane," she cried. "He aimed his rifle at my head. He threatened me. He discharged a weapon within the protected family recreation zone." "Protected what?" My nearest neighbor was more than 3,000 feet away. Crane turned to me with a stiff, uncomfortable expression. "Sir, can you place the rifle on the ground?" I took a breath, resisting the urge to tell him exactly what I thought of this circus. I set the rifle down gently. "Sir, turn around," he ordered. "For what exactly?" I asked, holding up my documentation. "This is my land, my permit, my kill." "Turn around," he repeated. He sounded annoyed, not at me, at the situation, at Karen's scrutiny, at whatever personal obligation she was calling in. I complied, and he cuffed me, loosely at least, as Karen grinned like a cat who'd finally trapped the laser pointer. Jeff protested furiously, waving permits like confetti. The other officers listened to him, clearly confused, glancing back and forth between Karen's melodrama and my calm compliance. One of them whispered, "I don't think this is right," but Crane ignored him. Karen paced triumphantly, recording everything. "I warned them," she announced loudly. "I have been monitoring this unsafe property for months. I knew he'd snap eventually." Unsafe property. Months of monitoring. I tried not to laugh. Mostly succeeded. They escorted me to the cruiser, seated me in the back while they sorted things out. Jeff kept demanding they check the boundary maps and the wildlife permits. The officers finally did, and I watched their faces shift from confusion to irritation to quiet embarrassment. Crane returned 10 minutes later, jaw tight. "You're being released," he said. "It seems there were misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. Right, Karen objected instantly. "You can't release him. He pointed a deadly weapon at me. He endangered a community leader." Crane didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, your claim doesn't match the evidence." "It does," she insisted. "You weren't here. He smirked menacingly. Smirked menacingly. Crane's patience snapped. "Ma'am, you need to leave the property now." Karen sputtered, stomped, ranted, and threatened to contact the County Environmental Oversight Council, which I knew for a fact didn't exist. Eventually, she stormed back toward the lake, muttering about taking this higher. Jeff helped me gather my things while the officers quietly drove away, all except Crane, who lingered one extra moment, eyes avoiding mine. "She shouldn't have been on your land," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "But she's on every committee with my mother. I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," I replied. He didn't argue. When he left, Jeff exhaled sharply. "Tyler, this is going to get ugly." He didn't know the half of it. That morning, Karen hadn't just stepped over my boundary lines. She'd declared war. I spent the night after my little roadside arrest, drinking lukewarm coffee in silence, reviewing the day's events over and over in my head. Not because I was traumatized. I'd had grizzlies come closer to killing me than Karen Stillman ever would. But because something about the whole situation stank like week-old bait in a warm truck bed. That woman hadn't just overstepped. She had planned that confrontation. Too perfectly. Too cleanly. She'd walked onto my land already on the phone with dispatch, knew exactly what to say to twist the situation, and had an officer who conveniently backed her story, up until the paperwork shut it down. You don't lie to police that fast unless you've had practice. You don't treat 74 acres of forest like your backyard unless you think it already belongs to you. So I started digging. The next morning, I went into town to the county assessor's office. I asked for any recent zoning changes, applications, or map alterations involving Lake Gravewood. The clerk, a nice guy named Tim, gave me a funny look when he pulled up the file. Looks like there were several recent inquiries about the northern side of the lake, he said. You own parcel 037, right? Yeah. Well, someone filed a boundary correction request. Says your parcel is being reviewed for community integration under shoreline preservation statute. Never seen that phrasing before. Who filed it? Tim hesitated. Request came from a consultant working on behalf of Lakefront Meridian's HOA. Name listed is Karen Stillman. Of course it was. She wasn't just trying to annoy me. She was trying to slowly absorb my property like some HOA-sanctioned cancer. I asked for copies of everything and paid for the printer to spit out a half-inch stack of bureaucratic bile. Back at home, I spread the papers across my work table like a forensic autopsy. Karen had been building a case. Over the past 3 months, she'd submitted fake noise complaints, cited alleged gunfire, and filed half a dozen environmental incident reports with a made-up community code. She'd even attached handwritten letters from supposed residents complaining about the man across the lake killing animals and scaring our children. Most of those names, they didn't exist. A few were names of old lakefront residents I remembered reading about in obituaries years ago. One even dated back to a guy who died before I bought the land. Sloppy work, entitled Confident and Sloppy. I scanned everything and sent it to a lawyer friend of mine back in Oregon just for a sanity check. He replied that night with a single sentence. She's trying to establish hostile jurisdiction. That's a thing, apparently. If someone can prove that land is functionally part of a neighborhood, through use, complaints, influence, they can try to reclassify it under local ordinances. It's rare, messy, but possible if the owner doesn't push back hard enough. I wasn't about to roll over. I checked the timestamps on the call Karen made to 911. I knew from my trail cameras that she'd entered my property 13 minutes before that call. She'd been pacing, filming, muttering into her radio. I pulled up the audio log from my security system and isolated a segment where she spoke into her headset. "Okay," she'd whispered. "He's out here. I've got the camera ready. If he fires, I'm calling it in." This could finally end him. Those were her exact words. This wasn't HOA nonsense anymore. This was targeted harassment, an orchestrated attempt to set me up and dismantle my legal claim to the land through manufactured outrage. I pulled together the footage, the audio, the zoning records, the complaint letters, all of it, and dumped it onto a drive. Then I reached out to someone I hadn't talked to in years, Diane Green, a former journalist who once embedded with our wildlife task force during a smuggling bust. She now freelanced for major papers and had a knack for sniffing out bureaucratic rot. I sent her the evidence and asked, "Am I crazy, or is this a goddamn story?" She called me that evening. "Tyler, this is a bonfire waiting for gasoline," she said. "Let me do some digging of my own." "Be careful," I warned her. "She's not just petty, she's organized." "I've danced with organized before," she replied. "Let's see how well she twirls." The next day, I walked the property perimeter twice. Replaced 3 signs that someone had torn down overnight. One of them had the words "community land" spray painted across it in red. I tightened every bolt on my trail cams. Karen wasn't just crossing my boundaries anymore, she was erasing them. Exactly 6 days after Karen's little stunt with the cops, she came back. But this time, she didn't come alone. It was early afternoon. I was down by the dock sanding a canoe for one of my weekend guests when my security app pinged, "Motion detected, Eastgate Trail." I checked the feed. 4 people, all in hiking boots and matching khaki vests, were walking single file down my trail like they were heading to a goddamn safari. Leading the charge, of course, was Karen. I dropped the sander, grabbed my field jacket, and started walking up the hill toward them. By the time I reached the clearing near my main cabin, they were already stomping across the gravel, pointing at trees like they were choosing new furniture for their Lakeview condos. Karen saw me and raised her arm in a mock-friendly wave. "Mr. Briggs." "Just the man I hope to see," she chirped. "We're here for an environmental assessment. Nothing to worry about." The man next to her, a tall guy with mirrored sunglasses and a half-grown beard, held up a clipboard. "Routine compliance sweep," he said. "We're with the Meridian HOA Green Task Force." "You're trespassing," I said flatly. "Get off my land." Karen rolled her eyes. "Actually, according to subsection 4 of our community expansion review process, your property is under provisional ecological review." "Yeah, funny, I don't remember signing off on that. Or inviting you." She ignored me and gestured toward one of the cabins. "You have runoff coming from that structure. That can damage shoreline vegetation. We'll need samples." One of her men broke off and headed toward the guest cabin. "Hey," I barked. "You touch that door, I swear I'll file charges." "No need to be hostile," Karen sang, as if this was a picnic. "If everything is up to code, you have nothing to worry about." Another guy, shorter, stockier, with a wildlife camera slung around his neck, started circling the perimeter of my barn, snapping photos. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "You're all being documented," I said calmly. "This is a private licensed wildlife reserve. You are not a regulatory body. You're trespassing, and if you so much as step on a marked trail, you'll have a real agency to answer to." That made them hesitate, just for a beat. But Karen, she doubled down. "We're acting under the HOA's environmental stewardship mandate," she said. "Frankly, Tyler, we've been more than patient. You've turned this side of the lake into an unsupervised shooting gallery. We have every right to ensure safety and sustainability." I gestured toward the tree line. "And I have every right to call the Department of Fish and Wildlife and have you all escorted off by state agents." That got her attention. 2 of her inspectors paused mid-photo. One looked at Karen like he suddenly realized his khaki vest might not protect him from felony trespass. I stepped aside, pulled up my contact list, and called the Regional Enforcement Office. "This is Tyler Briggs," I said, "owner and licensee of Gravewood Reserve. I have 4 unauthorized individuals claiming to conduct an environmental inspection on private land. One of them attempted to access a cabin. Another's photographing private property. I want a warden dispatched, fast." Karen's confidence cracked just a little. One of her goons tried to retreat quietly, but she barked at him to stay focused. 15 minutes later, a silver pickup with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife logo rolled up my access road. 2 wardens stepped out, real ones, with badges, sidearms, and notebooks. The lead officer, Warden Hughes, walked up to me first. "You the one who called?" I nodded. "They say they're inspectors." "They're not." He turned toward Karen and her merry band of HOA thugs. "Names, please, and any credentials you're operating under." Karen stepped forward, trying that same overbearing tone she used on the sheriff. "We're here under community regulation. This land is being reviewed." "No." Hughes cut her off. "This land is a licensed private wildlife reserve with state oversight. Your HOA has 0 jurisdiction. I've seen the registration myself." Karen tried to pivot. "Well, there were reports." "From who?" Hughes snapped. "The only complaint I've seen is from this landowner, about you. So, unless you've got a warrant or a badge I don't know about, you need to turn around and leave before this becomes a criminal trespass report." Karen looked stunned. The other 3 started backing away without her. Warden Hughes walked with me to the barn, asked to see my permits. I showed him everything. Predator control authorization, fire trail management plan, septic compliance, the wildlife station logbooks. He reviewed them silently, then turned and nodded. "Everything's buttoned up. Honestly, this place is more organized than most state preserves I've seen." "Thanks," I said. "I try." As the wardens escorted the intruders back to their car, Karen turned once, threw a last look at me like she wanted to scream. But she didn't. Not this time. I followed them until they were off my land, then locked the gate behind them. That night, I rewatched the trail cam footage. Karen walking in like she owned the damn forest. Her inspectors photographing, poking, opening latches, trying doors. One of them, tall guy with the sunglasses, hovering near the lockbox where I kept the guest weapon permits. I paused the footage and stared at his face. Something about him didn't sit right. He didn't act like a contractor. He acted like a guy watching a story unfold. By the next morning, I was done playing defense. I sent copies of the video footage, every second of Karen's fake eco-raid, to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the sheriff's office, and a lawyer in Spokane who specialized in property boundary litigation. I didn't just want to stop her anymore. I wanted to put her entire war machine through the legal wood chipper. First step, a lawsuit for trespassing and illegal surveillance. Second, a civil claim for defamation stemming from her 911 call and the incident reports she'd sent to local agencies with my name on them. Some of those documents made me out to be a menace with a history of firearm violence, which would have been hilarious if it weren't libelous. And third, I filed for a restraining order, not just against Karen, but against any member of the Lakefront Meridian HOA acting under her instruction. I requested a court-mandated buffer of 150 yards from any point along my property line. I attached video, sworn affidavits, permit logs, and 3 witness statements, including one from Warden Hughes himself. But I didn't stop at the courthouse. I went online. I uploaded clips from the trail cameras, carefully edited and time-stamped, showing Karen's fake inspection, her entering cabins uninvited, her shouting over me while I stood with my permits in hand. I included subtitles. I added context. I even included the moment she declared, "We control this shoreline, not rogue hunters." Then I posted a second clip, audio from her radio, picked up by one of my perimeter cams, where she whispered before the 911 call, "If he fires, I'm calling it in." This could finally end him. I uploaded both to YouTube under the title, HOA President Caught Trespassing and Lying to Police, full footage. I sent the links to local newsrooms. I sent them to outdoor enthusiast forums. I sent them to Diane, the journalist I'd tipped off earlier, and within 48 hours, it blew up. The comment sections exploded. Karen now patrolling federal forests like it's her backyard HOA? Give me a break. This is why you never trust anyone with a clipboard and no jurisdiction. She tried to have the guy arrested for hunting on his own land. Insane. A news team from Spokane asked for an interview. I agreed. We met by the lake. I stood by my cabin in full camo and boots, arms crossed next to the sign that read, Private Wildlife Reserve, Authorized Access Only. I told them everything, the legal filings, the harassment, the HOA's attempts to annex private land under phony community review. Nonsense. I was measured, respectful, but firm. I followed every law. I told the reporter, every requirement, every inspection. I built this place by the book. And now someone with a badge she made at Kinko's thinks she can decide who gets to live near a lake. I don't think so. Karen, for her part, went silent. The HOA issued a press release calling the videos edited misinformation and accusing me of targeted cyberbullying, but they offered no denial about her presence on my land, no defense for the fake inspectors, no comment about the police call. And then came the best part. A neighbor from the South Shore, a man named Frank Wallace, former HOA treasurer, messaged me through my website. He said he'd seen what happened. Said he'd been booted from the board months earlier after questioning Karen's leadership. Said he still had email archives. Frank sent me screenshots of internal messages between Karen and other board members. In one, Karen wrote, "If we can get the northern side reclassified, property values go up across the board. Don't let sympathy for Mr. Briggs get in the way. He's a squatter with a badge." In another, "We've started the paperwork. Once he gets flagged for non-compliance, we'll use that to claim joint jurisdiction. Don't worry, the county clerk is a friend." Frank had receipts, and I had a lawyer who loved receipts. I added them to the case file. Karen had overplayed her hand. She thought I'd stay quiet, that I'd fold under pressure. But here's the thing about people who work in the woods for a living. We know how to track. And we sure as hell know how to bite back when cornered. I knew things were turning when the sheriff's office called me directly. Not a deputy, not the front desk. The sheriff himself, Howard Tillman. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since I left the agency. He was a straight shooter, the kind who didn't get pulled into HOA politics. So when his voice came through the phone low and careful, I stopped everything I was doing. "Tyler," he said, "we need to talk about Karen Stillman." I sat down on the cabin steps. "You finally watching the videos?" "I've seen them, and more. We had a complaint filed last night from within her own board. She's been submitting fraudulent maps to the county." "Fraudulent?" "She's been using altered boundary lines on HOA stationery. Claims she's working under a shoreline reclamation initiative, but there's no such program registered anywhere in the state. She's fabricating documents and misrepresenting jurisdiction. That 911 call she made. She listed herself as Officer Stillman. That's impersonation of a public official. We're opening a formal investigation." I nodded slowly. About time. But that wasn't the only call I got that day. About 2 hours later, a different number lit up my phone, a Washington, D.C. area code. I almost ignored it, thinking it was spam, but something made me answer. "This is Briggs." "Mr. Briggs, this is Agent Farrell, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'd like to speak with you about recent events near Lake Gravewood." That stopped me cold. "Fish and wildlife," I said. "I already spoke with the local wardens." "I'm not from the local office. I work in Enforcement Division 7, focused on interference with federally recognized game management areas. Your reserve falls under federal observation due to its predator permit structure. And we have reason to believe it's not the only one being targeted." He paused. "You're not the first landowner who's had an HOA try to muscle in under environmental stewardship." He went on to describe similar patterns across the state. Private hunting or conservation landowners suddenly hit with noise complaints. Community. Observers walking onto land without permits. Sudden building code accusations. Fabricated runoff violations. And in every one of those cases, the same name kept popping up in documents. Karen Stillman. I wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed. Agent Farrell asked if I'd be willing to share my full file, including the internal HOA emails I'd been sent. I said yes. I sent everything. Videos, maps, the spray-painted signs, even the old newsletter article Karen had written about reclaiming the shoreline. This could become a federal obstruction case, he said. Especially if we find she coordinated harassment across state lines or falsified documents submitted to government offices. And then he said something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Some of your footage includes a man we've been tracking. Tall, wears sunglasses, claims to be an environmental contractor. We've seen him at 3 other incidents." "You mean the guy that came with Karen?" "Yes. We believe he's not who he says he is. We're not ready to release his identity yet, but let's just say you weren't the only one recording that day." After the call, I sat in silence for a while. The lake was perfectly still, but everything beneath the surface had shifted. Karen wasn't just some meddling neighbor with a clipboard. She was the nexus of something bigger, something manipulative. She'd turned HOA policy into a weapon and aimed it at anyone who stood between her and order. And now the feds were circling. Later that night, I walked the perimeter with my dog, Radar. It was cold, clear, with a full moon reflecting off the water like a blade. I checked my signs, every bolt, every camera, all intact. And then I found it. Tucked under one of the trail cameras, barely visible in the leaves, was a folded envelope. No address, no name, just the words, "Thought you'd want this." Inside, a single flash drive, no note. I took it straight to my cabin, plugged it into a clean laptop, and opened the folder. Inside, footage, edited clips, a document titled Operation Lakefront Draft Article, Confidential. I didn't recognize the writer's name, but the byline said Washington Post. The article dropped on a Monday. It started small, just a link in an email from Diane with the subject line, "Boom." By noon, it had made the front page of the Washington Post's digital edition. Title, The HOA Empire, How Private Neighborhoods Weaponize Power Against Landowners. Beneath it, a name I hadn't seen before, Simon Crane. The article opened with my story, the footage of Karen trespassing, the 911 call, the staged inspection, the legal filings, but it didn't stop there. It connected the dots. Simon, who I realized was the same environmental contractor from the fake inspection, had been embedded for 3 months with Lakefront Meridian under an alias. He'd joined Karen's task force, sat in on board meetings, even helped prepare the fake environmental review documents, all while filming and logging every interaction. In his own words, what began as community micromanagement evolved into a quiet war against private property rights. Armed with HOA charters and social clout, leaders like Karen Stillman used regulation as leverage to seize, silence, and ultimately dominate land beyond their jurisdiction. The article included emails, some I hadn't seen, where Karen talked about rezoning paths through intimidation, squeezing the Briggs parcel into HOA compliance, and leveraging media perception to discredit non-participants. Then came the most damning part, an internal HOA memo typed by Karen herself, titled North Shore Initiative, Strategic Steps. Item 1. Create public doubt around Briggs's legitimacy via noise and weapons complaints. Item 2. Stage environmentally framed incident to trigger enforcement response. Item 3. Push for emergency. Zoning review under Shoreline Preservation Clause. Loopback via Community Board. Item 4. Just read, he's stubborn. Might take media shaming to finish. The fallout was nuclear. By that afternoon, I had 3 news vans camped at the turnoff to my trail. Requests for interviews poured in from everywhere. Seattle, Portland, even 60 Minutes. One morning show wanted to do a live hike with me through my property like I was some woodland folk hero. I declined. I wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. I just wanted my land back, my quiet, my dignity. Karen, meanwhile, disappeared. The HOA's official site went dark. Their press email bounced. Several board members resigned within 48 hours. And the sheriff's office? They finally executed a search warrant for Karen's office at the HOA clubhouse. They didn't just find fake maps and fake letters. They found something worse. A black binder labeled Containment Strategy. Inside, photos of property owners across the region, including me. Printouts of land deeds, copies of permit applications, even records of calls to zoning offices, some altered to appear as though the owners had been reported for violations. They found a full page on me, address, map overlays, annotations like target visible from shore and needs legal friction. They also found a second flash drive. On it, audio recordings. Karen boasting to board members that she had enforcement allies in the sheriff's department and access to environmental contractors who don't ask questions. That last part, Simon Crane's sting confirmed it. Some of those contractors weren't just clueless volunteers. They were HOA-aligned pressure brokers, self-appointed consultants who went door to door across the state pushing owners to sign over trail access or opt in to neighborhood environmental oversight under threat of legal complaints. Fish and Wildlife launched an internal review. The state attorney general announced an inquiry. Karen's name made it onto the local news crawl beneath the words, "Suspected leader in coordinated land coercion campaign." I stayed off camera, mostly, but I released a written statement. Simple, direct. My name is Tyler Briggs. I am a private landowner, former wildlife enforcement officer, and the legal steward of Gravewood Reserve. I followed every law. I honored every rule. The same can't be said for those who claimed authority without it. I sent copies of my statement to every guest who'd stayed on my land, every contact in my conservation circle, and to every state official who had ever denied Karen's petitions. Then I took one more step. I filed a motion in Superior Court to begin formal action for damages. Not just personal damages, not just defamation, civil racketeering. Because by now, it wasn't just about lies. It was a system. And Karen had been at the top of it. The trial was public. Not in the sense of courtroom cameras or dramatic TV coverage, but in the way the town buzzed every morning it convened. People who hadn't cared about zoning maps in their lives were suddenly talking about property line fraud and false jurisdictional expansion over eggs and toast at the diner. Karen Stillman showed up to court with a new haircut and a legal team that looked like they'd been scraped off the bottom of an invoice stack. She wore beige, soft tones, the kind of outfit meant to say, "I'm not a threat anymore." But the judge didn't seem impressed, and neither was the prosecutor, who now had a tidy case file, 4 signed affidavits from ex-HOA board members, and a federal investigator from Fish and Wildlife sitting in the front row. The charges were layered: criminal trespass, filing fraudulent complaints to law enforcement, impersonating a public official, harassment, obstruction of federally licensed game activity, and conspiracy to defraud through civil coercion. She pleaded not guilty, of course, claimed she had only ever acted in the interest of community safety, but the emails, the footage, the audio logs, the damn binder, it all told a different story. 3 days into testimony, her attorney tried to pin the blame on a culture of over-empowerment within the HOA model. The courtroom laughed. On the 5th day, the judge issued a restraining order. Karen was forbidden to come within 150 yards of my property permanently. The same day, the jury returned a unanimous verdict on the civil case: invasion of privacy, libel, property interference, targeted harassment. Award: $118,000 in damages. She stared ahead when the verdict was read. No outburst, no apology, just silence. Like a program had finally crashed behind her eyes. By the following week, Lakefront Meridian's HOA board was dissolved pending audit. 2 other board members faced fines for misusing HOA funds to pay for consultants and fake reports. Their beachfront signs were pulled, their bylaws revoked. For the first time since I'd bought the land, the lake felt honest again. But I wasn't done. I used a portion of the compensation money to install a new gate system and upgrade the trail camera grid with real-time AI motion tracking. I made signs that could be read from a drone. I even added a new plaque by the main entry path. This is a federally registered private wildlife reserve, not subject to any HOA jurisdiction. False emergency calls will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Next to it, on a smaller post, I added one more sign, a photo of Karen in her vest mid-rant, waving a flashlight like she was directing traffic at the gates of hell. Caption: "This woman once tried to arrest a deer. She lost." The reactions were exactly what you'd expect. Guests laughed. Locals stopped by just to take photos. One man even asked if I could make t-shirts. I said no, but I printed 2 mugs. One for me, one for Diane. As for Simon, the undercover journalist, he won an award for his piece. I sent him a message. Thanks for not opening the weapon safe that day, or for trying to anyway. He replied, thanks for not shooting me. You seemed close. Fair. Life moved forward. I kept the land, kept the cabins, expanded the reserve's outreach program for veterans. I was approached by 2 conservation groups who asked if I'd consider turning Gravewood into a training site for backcountry enforcement teams. I said maybe. Sometimes I still see shadows on the far side of the lake. New neighbors walking carefully, slowly, with that look of people who now know better than to assume anything. And Karen. No one knows where she moved. She vanished like a bad idea. The woods, finally, are quiet again. And this time, it's not because people were told to shut up. It's because they learned who owns the silence.